This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
All right, so get this, listeners. Today, we're going deep into the Amazon. But not the rainforest you're probably picturing. We're talking Amazonian geoglyphs.
Oh, yeah, those are fascinating.
They are. These giant earthworks are like hidden messages from, way back.
Yeah.
And they totally change how we see the Amazon before Europeans showed up.
You got it. People think of the Amazon as this pristine, untouched place. But these geoglyphs, different story. They're changing everything we thought we knew about the history of the region.
Okay, so for our listeners, can you, describe them? What do these geoglyphs actually look like?
Well, imagine massive shapes just etched right into the earth. Circles, squares, you name it. Some are U-shaped, and some of these things are huge. We're talking over 300 meters across. That's like 3 football fields, end to end.
Wow.
And they weren't just, drawn on the ground. They dug these things out by hand.
Seriously?
Using tools. When you think about how big they are, it's kind of mind-blowing.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
How old are we talking about here?
Well, carbon dating tells us some are over 2,000 years old.
No way.
Which means they're older than what we usually think of as, advanced civilizations in other parts of the world.
So while Rome was happening, there were people in the Amazon building these crazy earthworks. It's like history class got it all wrong. But why? What were they for?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question. Archaeologists have been debating this for years. Were they, ceremonial spots? Settlements? Did they have something to do with astronomy? Or were they just marking territory?
I like the astronomy idea. I'm imagining, ancient Amazonian stargazers using the geoglyphs to track solstices and stuff. Is there any evidence for that?
It's possible. Some do seem to line up with the summer solstice, so it's not totally out there.
Interesting.
The settlement theory is less likely, though.
Oh, why?
Well, because there's no sign of typical settlement stuff, like houses or trash pits, around the geoglyphs, I mean.
Okay, but what about that terra preta, that super fertile soil made by indigenous people? Maybe the geoglyphs had something to do with agriculture.
Oh, that's an interesting connection. You're right, some geoglyphs do have terra preta nearby, so yeah, they could have been part of some, really advanced system for managing the land. And producing food, of course.
Wow.
We tend to think of the Amazon as this untouched paradise, but the truth is people have been shaping this ecosystem for a long, long time.
So we're talking thousands of years, and these geoglyphs were part of that. That changes how we see early agriculture in the region. It's like the Nazca lines, but even more mysterious.
Exactly. And a lot of them were only found because of deforestation, sadly, hidden under all those trees. It's a tragedy, but also an opportunity for us to discover more about the past.
Makes you wonder how many more are out there, still hidden, waiting to be found, and what else they can tell us about these ancient cultures.
I know. The exciting thing is we're finding new ones all the time. Technology like satellite images and LiDAR is really helpful.
Oh, cool.
We're talking about a massive network of sites spread out over huge distances. It's really incredible.
You mentioned artifacts before, found at the geoglyph sites. What kind of things have they found?
Well, things like pottery pieces, tools, and even ceremonial objects. And here's the kicker. Some of this stuff came from hundreds of miles away.
What?
Yeah. It tells us they were trading and exchanging culture on a pretty massive scale, which is amazing when you think about it.
So elaborate on that a little. Hundreds of miles. What does that tell us about how these trade routes worked?
Well, picture this. A network crisscrossing the Amazon, rivers, trails, connecting all these different communities.
I like it.
They were trading stuff like obsidian for tools, feathers for decoration, and maybe even plants and seeds, not just goods, but knowledge and ideas, too.
Wow.
Those networks would have been super important for spreading new technology, agriculture, even religion.
It's crazy to think about. So they weren't just isolated groups. They were part of this huge interconnected world. And the geoglyphs are at the center of it all. But if they weren't permanent settlements, how are they being used?
Good question. We don't find a ton of artifacts, so most likely they were gathering places for rituals, trade, seasonal ceremonies, maybe even temporary settlements, used at certain times of the year.
I'm picturing these massive gatherings taking place at the geoglyphs. What would that have been like? What kind of rituals and ceremonies were they doing?
It's hard to say for sure, but we do have some clues. These things took a lot of effort to build.
For sure.
So clearly they were spiritually important to the people who built them. And the fact that so many are circular, that hints at rituals about nature cycles, maybe even ancestor worship. Plus, we do have stories from indigenous peoples that talk about ancient earthworks.
Huh.
Linking those stories to specific geoglyphs is tough, though. Still a lot of research to be done there.
And you mentioned water management before. Imagine the engineering it would have taken to build those geoglyphs, especially if they were meant to control flooding. Talk about ingenuity.
Oh, absolutely. Managing those floods would have been a huge challenge in the Amazon. The geoglyphs could have been part of a very clever system to deal with that. We're talking engineering solutions that were like centuries ahead of their time.
Seriously.
Totally.
Yeah, totally.
It challenges how we think about ancient civilizations. We often think of advanced as meaning they built with stone, but these earthworks show a different kind of ingenuity, one that worked with nature. You got it. These weren't isolated people living in a pristine wilderness. They were actively shaping their environment in complex ways, and we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah. It makes you realize that what we think of as natural is often the result of centuries of human interaction.
Exactly. And that's important to remember, especially when we think about how we approach conservation today.
Good point. But back to the geoglyphs themselves, we've talked about circles and squares. What about those U-shaped ones? They seem pretty unique.
Yeah, they are. And there are a lot of theories about what they were for. Some think they were used to channel water, maybe for irrigation or for rituals. Others think they might have been astronomical markers, aligned with the sun or stars. We're not totally sure yet. But that's what makes them so interesting.
You know, part of me likes that we don't have all the answers. It makes it more fun to think about.
I agree. That's what I love about archaeology. We're always looking for answers, asking new questions. We're putting together a puzzle piece by piece.
It's not just about dusty old artifacts, right? It's about understanding how people lived, their whole culture. And these Amazonian geoglyphs, they're rewriting the history books.
Exactly. It's a golden age of discovery right now, and the Amazon is at the forefront. Every year, we learn something new, and it changes everything.
So how do we unravel these mysteries? What are the next steps?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out when each one was built. Carbon dating gives us a general idea, but we need more precise methods.
To understand the order they were built in.
Yeah.
And how they were used over time.
Yeah, exactly. Like creating a timeline. Another thing we can do is study the soil. In and around the geoglyphs, I mean. Oh, yeah, soil can tell us a lot. About plants, agriculture, even rituals.
That's wild.
We're looking for evidence of things like ceremonial burning or special plants. It's like forensic science, but for archaeology.
I never thought about it that way. And I imagine technology is helping a lot with these discoveries.
You bet. LIDAR, drones, satellite images, it's all revolutionizing archaeology. We can see beneath the trees, map out huge areas, find things we'd never see otherwise. It's like having X-ray vision for the past.
It sounds like an amazing time to be studying archaeology. Like we're about to uncover some truly groundbreaking stuff about the Amazon.
It really is. And remember, it's not just about the past. It's about understanding the present and even the future.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. The geoglyphs tell us that people have been living in the Amazon and shaping it for a long time.
Right.
It challenges the idea that it's a pristine wilderness, and that matters for how we approach conservation efforts in the region.
So we need to acknowledge that indigenous people have been managing this land for centuries.
Exactly. And we have a lot to learn from them, from their traditional knowledge, their sustainable practices. They've kept the Amazon alive for generations.
It's like these geoglyphs are a message from the past, showing us a different way to live in harmony with nature.
I like that. A message from the past. And maybe a guide for the future, too.
Powerful stuff. Well, you've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about today. But before we wrap up, what would you recommend for someone who's hooked on this whole geoglyph mystery? Where can they learn more?
Oh, there are some great resources out there. Journals like Antiquity and Latin American Antiquity have tons of research on this. You can also find documentaries on National Geographic and BBC. And if you want to go deeper, there's a great book called 1491 by Charles C. Mann. It'll blow your mind.
Amazing. I'll have to check that out myself. And for our listeners, remember, the Amazon is full of surprises. So keep asking questions, keep exploring. Who knows what other mysteries are out there waiting to be found?
Absolutely. Keep that curiosity alive.
Well said. Thanks for being on the show today. This has been an incredible deep dive.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You know, it's amazing to think about just how big these geoglyphs are and all the work that went into making them. Makes you wonder about the people who built them. Like, how were they organized? Did they have leaders who decided to build these things? Or was it more of a group effort?
It's a great question. Archaeologists are still working on that. But yeah, the sheer scale of these projects, it definitely tells us they were organized. They had to be.
Huh.
It wasn't just random digging. There was planning involved, leadership, a shared vision.
Right, right. And it wasn't like a one-time thing either, was it? I
Yeah.
mean, you mentioned before that they were probably built over centuries.
Exactly. We're talking generations of people working on these things, adding to them, changing them, passing down the knowledge of how to build them. It's pretty incredible how their culture stayed strong over such a long time.
It really makes you think, if these geoglyphs could talk, what stories would they tell? Like, what did these people believe in? What were their rituals like? What made them spend so much time and energy building these things? Were there special ceremonies or festivals connected to them?
We can only imagine, right? Those gatherings must have been amazing. Maybe the geoglyphs were used for rituals about farming or fertility, or honoring their ancestors, or maybe even something to do with the stars. Maybe they were a way to connect with the cosmos or the spirits of the land.
It's mind-blowing.
Mm.
And the knowledge that must have been passed down through generations, the astronomy, the engineering, how well they understood the rainforest. It's like a whole library of wisdom is lost.
Yeah, it really is. But every time we find something new, it's like we're getting a little bit of that knowledge back. For example, we're starting to understand that these ancient Amazonian societies, they knew a lot about plants and animals. Like they knew how to manage the forest in a way that was good for them and good for the ecosystem.
That's incredible. And so relevant today with all the environmental problems we're facing. Maybe if we study what they did, we can learn how to live more sustainably in the rainforest.
Exactly. We have so much to learn from these cultures who lived in the Amazon for so long without destroying it. Things like agroforestry, how they managed water, their knowledge of medicinal plants. It could be really helpful for conservation and dealing with climate change.
It's like those geoglyphs are a message from the past, telling us, hey, we did this, maybe you can learn something from us.
I like that. A message from the past, and maybe a roadmap for the future.
It's amazing how these geoglyphs were hidden for so long. Then deforestation revealed them. And now they're teaching us about the past and maybe even helping us plan for the future.
And the story's not over yet. We're still learning thanks to new technology and the hard work of archaeologists.
So what's next? What are archaeologists hoping to figure out in the next few years?
Well, one of the big mysteries is still why they made the geoglyphs in all those different shapes and patterns. We have some ideas, but we need more evidence.
So more digging, more analyzing.
Yep, exactly. It's like a puzzle. And we're trying to find all the pieces scattered across the Amazon. Another thing we're focusing on is understanding how all these ancient societies were connected. The trade routes, the exchange of culture.
The trade routes, huh? It's fascinating to think about how they moved goods and ideas through the rainforest. It really changes how we see the Amazon. It wasn't so isolated after all.
Right. They were connected to a wider world, sharing goods, ideas, even their genes. And those connections really shaped their cultures.
Before we started talking, I had this image of simple shapes in the ground. But now I see these geoglyphs as something much more. They represent culture, spirituality, ingenuity. It's amazing.
I'm glad to hear that. That's why I love doing this research. It challenges our assumptions and shows how diverse and complex human history really is. And with the Amazonian geoglyphs, we're only just getting started.
I can't wait to see what they discover next. What other secrets are hidden in the rainforest?
Who knows? That's the beauty of archaeology, the thrill of discovery. And every time we learn something new, it changes how we understand ourselves and our place in the world.
It's like a reminder that history is never really gone. We just have to find it. And sometimes what we find, it makes us question everything we thought we knew. And maybe it could even teach us how to live better.
I couldn't have said it better myself. For anyone listening who wants to learn more, there are tons of resources out there. Journals, documentaries, online forums. It's a fascinating field. Go explore it.
This has been an incredible journey. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but it's been so eye-opening.
I agree. And remember, learning is a lifelong journey. Never stop being curious about the world. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here. It's been amazing. It's just incredible, to think that these geoglyphs have been there all this time, just hidden beneath the trees, watching centuries go by. It makes you wonder what else is out there in the Amazon, waiting to be found.
Oh, there's got to be more. I'm sure of it. I mean, The Amazon is massive. We've only explored a tiny bit of it, archaeologically speaking. As technology gets better and we work more with the indigenous communities, who knows what we might find?
Speaking of technology, you mentioned LiDAR before. Can you explain how that works? Like, how does it actually help find these hidden geoglyphs?
Sure. It's like, imagine this laser beam scanning across the rainforest. It goes right through the leaves and everything. And then the light bounces back. And that creates a 3D map of what's underneath. That's LiDAR. It can show us tiny changes in the ground, stuff we could never see just by looking.
So it's like taking away all the trees and seeing the land how it was like 1,000 years ago.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what kind of details can it show about the geoglyphs, things we wouldn't see otherwise?
Well, LiDAR gives us super precise measurements of the shapes, the sizes, which way they're pointing, so we can make really detailed maps. It can even find things that are buried now, like old ditches that have filled in or mounds. So we get a much better idea of what the whole site looked like originally.
That must be so helpful for researchers to understand how they built these things and what they were used for. It's like having a time machine.
Yeah, it really is. LiDAR is changing how we study archaeology, especially in places with lots of trees like the Amazon. And it's not just about geoglyphs. We're finding old settlements, roads, even farming systems. It's a whole network hidden under the trees.
So it's like putting a puzzle together. LiDAR helps us see the bigger picture, how all these different sites are connected, and it shows us how complex those Amazonian cultures really were.
Exactly. And we're only just beginning to use LiDAR. As the technology improves, we're going to see so many new discoveries. I think it's going to rewrite the history of the Amazon completely.
I'm excited to see what they find. But okay, for our listeners who are hooked on this whole geoglyph thing, where can they go to learn more? What would you suggest?
Well, there are some really good journals out there. Antiquity, Latin American Antiquity. They have a lot of research on the geoglyphs. A lot of those articles are online now, too.
Okay, great. I'll make sure to link those in the show notes. What about videos or documentaries? Any good ones out there?
Yeah, for sure. National Geographic, BBC, they have some great documentaries. They often have footage from the air, so you can really see how huge those geoglyphs are. And they usually have interviews with archaeologists, too, which is always interesting.
I bet. And for anyone who really wants to dive deep into the history of the Americas before Columbus, any book recommendations?
1491 by Charles C. Mann is a really good one. It talks about how sophisticated those civilizations were, and it challenges a lot of the assumptions we have about the past.
Oh yeah, 1491 is a classic. Definitely a must-read. Well, that sounds like there's plenty for our listeners to explore.
Absolutely. Go out there, research, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge what you think you know. The more we learn about these cultures, the more we realize how much there still is to discover.
It's been such an amazing journey today, exploring these mysteries with you. It feels like we've only just started, but it's been incredibly eye-opening. What a fascinating glimpse into the past.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a pleasure. And remember, everyone, keep learning, keep questioning, keep being amazed by the world.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the Amazonian geoglyphs.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.